Hi everyone there behind your screens, and thank you Visma for inviting me here to talk about something that I have been working quite closely with recently, and also perhaps a shade darker topic than I usually go for, but I'm going to talk about digital abuse and some ways that digital abuse is conducted, and also how this all plays out into the overall bigger picture of privacy and why we all should care about privacy for ourselves and also of others. But before I go into the topic, I want to introduce myself. So my name is Kankaala and I'm head of Outreach. And Outreach is a non-profit organization where we seek to help at-risk groups to reclaim their digital privacy. And currently we operate under Disobey, which is a Nordic security/hacker community. And I also work as a security lead at a startup currently. And in the past, I worked as a security consultant doing pen testing, incident response, and so on. And also for a bit as a security researcher. So my background is quite heavily on the offensive security side. I also have two podcasts that are in English and one that's in Finnish, which is my first language. The first one that I've ever started was We Need to Talk About InfoSec, and it's on a pause. But I also did another podcast with Detectify called Undetected. And here in Finland, where I live, we made a documentary TV show called Team Whack, where we showcase hacking and demystify hacking for the general public and showcase what it looks like to break things as we do. If you're interested about Outreach and what we do, then do feel free to head out to outrch.org. But to kick off this talk, I think it's perfect to start with my own history and my background. So this is a picture from the mid 90s, and I think this showcases quite well the look and feel how it felt to own a PC at the time. So we had this very retro white color joystick and all this set here, and this is me sitting on the chair, and that's my little sister pulling on the chair and asking for her turn on the PC or on the computer. And I used to be super into video games at that time and even now, but I used to play this game called Jazz Jackrabbit. And I used to play so much that I would get epileptic seizures and my mother would have to force me away from the computer, but I would sneak back in and play some more. Going to the early 2000s, I started to make my own website, because if you wanted to be part of any kind of internet community, then you basically needed to have a website or be on IRC or some other channel. I used a service called GeoCities, where you could make websites by dragging and dropping elements onto the page, or as I did, because it wasn't very scalable if you did the drag and drop thing. So I started to code websites and made my own websites. And at that time, I was told from multiple different, from my mother and from the school, and everyone told me to never put any personal information online, because that personal information could be used against me, which is kind of ironic today. But I was vowed to never put, for example, my name, or not picture would be out of the question, never to put your own picture online. So coming to this day, there has been a complete shift in the attitude when it comes to what we put online. And that also means that the way the value of data has completely changed, because there's so much data and it's out there for grabs. So it's easy to use by companies that want to leverage it, or also other users that want to turn this data against us, because we leave so much data behind us, and also the devices that we use to connect to these online services or with other people are so powerful that they are also powerful means of following us around and seeing what we're up to. I wanted to discuss quickly what is privacy in its original definition, and just to lay out the obvious here, but security does not equal privacy, even though there are some overlapping aspects. The security traditionally means the technical means of how data is protected, or processes or so on that are protecting data in technical way or with the processes. But privacy is more about the control over personal information and understanding or being able to limit the exposure of it and understanding where that information is used, and also having the overall control of when we want to share data with whom and the overall audience. But digital abuse is the complete disregard for privacy. And there are multiple definitions for digital abuse, but I found a really good one from Varjo, which is a Finnish organization helping victims of domestic abuse. And their definition, it was in Finnish, so I translated it into English, but it's digital abuse is repeated unwarranted contact, stalking, and observation that cause fear or distress in the victim. Abuse comes with threatening behavior, scare tactics, controlling, and violent acts. Digital abuse affects overall well-being and safety of the victim. So as you can see, it's quite a broad definition, and that's for a reason, because the nature of the abuse in itself is quite hard to define sometimes, and it's not happening in isolation in the physical world, and especially not in the digital world. So the digital world and the devices that we use, they typically provide the means of conducting abusive behavior, but it's not happening necessarily in isolation. So it's not only happening necessarily in the digital world. And I want to also point out here that anyone can be a victim of digital abuse. So regardless of gender, age, or where you're from, any one of us can be a target of that, and I'll go into detail why that is so. But overall about digital abuse, when it comes to domestic abuse or abuse conducted by or perpetrated by friends or close circle of people around you, it comes in many shades. So it can be, for example, forcefully reading your messages or demanding access to your accounts, to your personal social media accounts or messaging apps, non-consensually either taking or sharing videos or screenshots, using different types of platforms to spread malicious content, or using other type of stalking devices to, for example, geolocators that are physical devices that can be installed in a car or dropped in a purse to follow you around and see where you're going. And something that we've been investigating quite a bit in outreach as well is something called stalkerware. And stalkerware is also one mean of conducting digital abuse, but it's a software, and sometimes it goes by the name of spyware or spouse monitoring or some type of monitoring tool. And it's a software or app that is installed in iOS or Android or computers, and it typically allows remote access to the device or its data or to the location. And depending on the platform, the functionalities of the stalkerware really highly vary. So for example, on iOS, a lot of the stalkerware depend on the access to iCloud credentials. On Android, on the other hand, we see, at least from what we witnessed, is more powerful stalkerware in that sense that it's easier to access, for example, calls or taking pictures or access social media apps through different types of means. And for computers, there's either stalkerware or then sometimes tools such as TeamViewer or other remote access tools are used directly to access those devices. And I have to say the stalkerware is not something that would be used necessarily by criminals, because stalkerware typically either needs some preliminary information such as iCloud credentials or physical access to the device, and typically it's done by accessing the device physically. And a typical thing that the perpetrators typically want from the victim's device is the geolocation, and then sometimes the accessing messages and other sensitive data as well. And a lot of these stalkerware, they are not necessarily made for techie people, and that's because they they a lot of the times they have very intuitive graphical user interfaces, for example. And here are some screenshots of stalkerware. For example, here's a selfie that this one took when you open the phone, and the location tracking and call logs. And here's some features that are promised by some stalkerware vendors. So it's quite evident that these are meant to be used by people who don't necessarily have the technical knowledge, and typically these also come with quite detailed instructions how to install them and also hide them. And the overall trend when it comes to stalkerware is that it seems to be increasing, and there are some alarming statistics on how quickly it seems to increase all across the globe and for in different types of communities. And if we look at our teenagers and our children, it seems that also for them it's a growing trend and also an alarming trend how much our teenagers are, for example, suffering from digital abuse in relationships. So for example, here it's unfortunately in Finnish, but I'll translate it for you. So this is a statistic from 2019. And there is 264 respondents, and out of those respondents, 75% of them said that they have experienced some form of digital abuse in their relationships. So that's quite a huge number, and taking consideration the definition of digital abuse, so that could be stalkerware or then someone reading messages forcefully or without permission. And one reason why this all is made possible is that we basically have these devices that are equal for digital machetes in our hands. With one swipe, you are able to open your camera and take photos and videos, or it's so easy to screenshot messages and take them out of context, make memes or fake profiles or other types of create content that is malicious, purposefully malicious and trying to hurt one another. So the platforms are there, and these powerful devices are huge enablers for just quickly taking a photo, for example, situation that could potentially make someone's life really difficult. And the problem here as well in general is that abuse may look like it's entertainment. It is sometimes very hard for the viewer, for example, of content online to determine if the material that we see is consensually uploaded and if it's abusive. And one example would be Star Wars kids. So if you were on the internet in the early 2000s, I'm sure you know this meme, but it's a boy who is waving around the stick and making some sleek Star Wars moves, and it's this boy called Gislan Reza who filmed himself, and his schoolmates found the video recording and then started to spread it online. And for general public and whoever saw this, it looked fun, and it didn't look necessarily non-consensual. But for Reza, bullying in his school got really severe for him, and at that time also there were no real playbooks or understanding how to cope with this kind of abuse, especially when it happens online. So this is just a classic reminder of how abuse can really look like it's consensual or fun. And these we should drive for privacy controls that protect us when we are the most vulnerable. And that is when we are with our devices, that when we are just using the applications that are heavily addictive and are basically hooked to them and addicted to them, and where we're looking for solace. And while this is basically or potentially on the other end of privacy spectrum, but I just wanted to drop here that abuse or exploitation of privacy is not necessarily just domestic or happens from because our friends want to abuse us online, but it could be just organizations or some different organizations that want to affect our decision making or affect the way we look at the world. And these platforms and these devices that we're carrying with us all the time, they make it possible to launch large-scale human experiments on us to basically see if they can affect our decision making. And one sad example of this is, for example, what happened with Cambridge Analytica and when they were caught with trying to affect elections all over the world, but most notably in the US. So with that being said, I want to just point out that privacy exploitation is equally, if not even worse than exploiting a technical vulnerability. And that is because privacy exploitation has direct potential impact on a person's well-being, or in a community, their well-being or their safety. But for example, exploiting an RCE vulnerability on a server, it may or may not have direct effects on an end user. So it's really something that we need to take into account when we try to move forward and make more secure software. So what can we actually do? For one, we can definitely demand for better legislation to not only for limiting political manipulation on the platforms that we use, but also for the platforms and the providers of these services to make them more responsible for the content that is displayed on their services, and especially if it's abusive content, and also have more rights for example, erasure and being able to delete abusive content from spreading online. We also can develop technical means of protecting privacy. And good example is, for example, the newest version of Android that comes with a lot of improvements to privacy and for example, how in general in smartphones, how we can make them by default more better equipped at privacy. For example, prompting the user if some app is constantly tracking geolocation on the background. And this is probably or potentially a given, but we should always make sure that whatever we upload online, that it's uploaded consensually, and that especially like we take a look at the content that we are about to upload and ask ourselves, do I need to, do I have the consent for this, or could this actually have some kind of privacy impact, or could I breach someone's privacy if I upload this content? And at Outreach, we have also written some guidance for how to fight against stalkerware. So if you or someone you know is dealing with digital abuse, then feel free to head out to outrch.org and see if this guidance will be of any help to you. So now that we have went through all these ways of conducting digital abuse, then what is the actual definition of privacy? And is the definition that only regards with the exposure of data and the control of data, is it really the only definition that should be attached to privacy? I think privacy is the freedom to live without fears and to think on our own. And I think these rights should be constitutional and they should be universal. And it should be something that we also as security community try to strive toward when we audit software, when we pen test software, when we are looking at any kind of solution, and try to find privacy-related vulnerabilities as well. Thank you so much for listening to this talk. And if you want to follow me, then here's my Twitter and Instagram handles. And after this, if you want to reach out or if you don't want to ask something publicly in the upcoming section, then do feel free to reach out to me also over email, and let's make privacy better together in the future.